past. So welcome to our another Wednesday talk. Today, Dr. Feyzullah Yılmaz will speak. Feyzullah is a very close friend of mine, and he obtained his PhD in Sabancı University Political Science Department. His thesis has the same title, with Overcoming Nihilism through Sufism. Now he's working with us as a postdoctoral researcher in our project, Eco-Reasoning project that we are doing currently with Portugal. He recently got accepted from a journal, Oxford Journal of Islamic Studies, and his article on exactly the same title, Overcoming Nihilism through Sufism, will be published in 2018, so you will have the chance to read it directly. So floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Önder. He also forgot to add that he was in my thesis jury, so he is one of the 5 members who made me a doctor, let's say.
With my pleasure.
So normally I don't start with this, but since we are in a Mevlevihane and since Iqbal considered Rumi as his spiritual guide, at least after a certain point in his life, I thought it would be nice to begin with this and just think about I don't know how to make this bigger actually.
So where is it?
So I will ask you to read what it says there and think about it for 1 minute, and then I will start talking about it, but I want to make it bigger. Just wait. Wait, where is it? Hocam dur şimdi, hemen bütün sürprizi öldürme, ama benim mouse nereye gitti?
Nasıl?
Şu an gitti hocam. Biz hiçbir şey görmüyoruz şu an.
Göreceksiniz, bir saniye hocam. It doesn't get bigger. Hocam bu nasıl daha büyük hale geliyor?
Şöyle yapalım.
Oldu. Tamam, it's okay now.
You can read it now. It says, Pakistan'ın milli şair ve düşünürü Muhammed İkbal'e Aziz Mürşidi Hazreti Mevlana'nın huzurunda bu makam verildi 1965. So 1 minute started, or even 30 seconds, I don't know. If you see anything inaccurate, if you see anything problematic, or if anything that guesses, let's start with yes. Are there any factual inaccuracies, hocam?
He died in 1928, which was when Pakistan was established.
Okay. So,
So he can't be Pakistan's national
poet and thinker. That's a very direct way of saying it. What else? Which would be debatable, but true in my opinion as well. There is also a factual, sorry. This is a tombstone, memorial tombstone given to him. No. It's just a tombstone. Sorry? Yeah, as I said, he considered Rumi as his spiritual guide, so he was given this memorial place. This is in Konya, in the Gülbahçe of Mevlana''s, let's say, where Mevlana is located as well. Mevlana's tomb is located. So he was given, after his death, this memorial place in the presence of his teacher, let's say, Hazreti Mevlana.
I would like to connect it with the nation point of Turkey.
Nation of what?
The nation point of Turkey.
Uh-huh.
They were friends in the sense that they used to communicate with each other. So I think this just reminds me of this connection.
Uh-huh. And and the date of birth is also written there wrong. He was born in 1877, but this indicates 1873. In fact, there were debates regarding Iqbal's exact date of birth in the 1950s, but this was already settled in 1950s. So this tomb was put there in 1965, and they still put the wrong date. I visited Konya last year, and after I came back, I wrote to the, I don't know, municipality of Konya Tourism or Cultural Agency or whatever, and I wrote about it, like, this is wrong, and they said, after 2 months they replied, they said that they have consulted with the Pakistani embassy in Ankara, and that they confirmed that this is wrong, so they will change it, they were going to change it, they said. I will go in about a month, and I will check if they have changed or not.
We are also going to Konya after 3 weeks for Shebe Arus.
Yeah, same, I will also go to Shebe Arus, so let's see if they have changed it or not, or if it's just like Turks saying, okay, we will do it, but they don't do it. So the problem and main argument of my talk, let's say, it will be the talk itself, in my view, is about one of the leading modern Muslim thinkers, philosophy and its development. And my understanding of the literature is that his intellectual development is usually understood as shifting from being a supporter of Indian nationalism and being a pantheist to being a supporter of Muslim nationalism and a theist. So this is what I also called something like an established narrative in literature. If you open up any book on Iqbal's life, Iqbal's philosophy, you may see this, this narrative which divides Iqbal's life and intellectual development into 3 stages. At first, as I said, I mean, there are also dates covering these periods. So they divide Iqbal's life with respect to his trip to Europe for higher education between 1905 and 1908. I will talk about the narrative later, so I won't go into details of it right now. But my main departing point is that this narrative fails to situate Iqbal's philosophy and its intellectual development in its particular historical and philosophical context. And the goal is to go beyond this failure. And my argument is that Iqbal's philosophy and its development is best analyzed and understood within the context of and as a response to the problem of nihilism. And I, as a supplement of this argument, is that I argue that Iqbal's response to the problem of nihilism is a reconstructed form of Sufism. Before going into the details of the established narrative and the details of my alternative interpretation of the philosophy of Iqbal's development, I will just briefly, very briefly, talk about some of the main turning points of Iqbal's life. Like, he was born in November 1877. He studied philosophy, Arabic, English literature at the university, and he did an MA in philosophy. He worked as a reader in philosophy in Oriental College in India between 1900 and 1904. He went to Europe for higher education in 1905, and first he went to Cambridge University Trinity College. He spent there almost 2 years, but he went there as an advanced graduate student. At that time, Cambridge University was not offering PhDs, and Iqbal had already a MA degree. So in order to get a PhD degree, his professors and he himself made some arrangements with University of Munich, and they allowed him to present his dissertation in English, which was at the time like, I mean, they were supposed to, at the University of Munich, you were supposed to present it in German, write it in German as well. But somehow they exempted Iqbal from these rules. So they presented his doctoral dissertation to University of Munich in 1908 with the title of The Development of Metaphysics in Persia. It's a historical analysis of the development of metaphysics beginning from pre-Islamic period in Persia to post-Islamic period, which is a very interesting book in my view. In 1908, Iqbal returned to India. Before returning back, he already passed the bar exam in London, for instance. So after he returned back, he both performed as a lawyer and also a university professor, and also wrote extensively after he returned. These are some of the poetry books he wrote. In 1922, he was given knighthood by the British Crown, and he became Sir Muhammad Iqbal.
Sure.
Yeah. And during his lifetime, he was also concerned with the Indian political life to a certain extent, with the communal problem, how all these minorities and ethnic, religious, whatever, were going to live peacefully together. He wrote his so-called magnum opus in 1932. It was called 6 Lectures on the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, but then in 1932 he went to Oxford to make a presentation, and this was later added as the 7th lecture, but then they didn't name it 7 lectures, but they just named it as it is written there, the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. And he died April 1938, the same year Atatürk died. I don't know if there is any importance about that, but as a Turk, yes. So then I argued that the problem of nihilism lies at the heart of Iqbal's philosophy, and Iqbal's engagement with this determines, as I understand it, the development of Iqbal's philosophy as well. So what do I mean by the problem of nihilism? Who comes to your mind when I say nihilism first? Who? Nietzsche. Who else? Heidegger, maybe. Yeah. It's, of course, accurate. Like the name, the concept nihilism has most often been associated with his name, Nietzsche's name. But the problem of nihilism as a philosophical problem dates almost 100 back years before Nietzsche. So the first time that nihilism as a philosophical problem being debated or introduced was by Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi at the end of 18th century. Let's say if you want to mark a beginning, it would be 1783, during the so-called pantheism controversy in modern German philosophy. It first started as a private debate between Jacobi and Mendelssohn. They were arguing between each other, whether another important figure, Lessing, an important Enlightenment philosopher, let's say, whether Lessing was a Spinozist or not, thus pantheist or not. So this was important. I mean, Lessing's Spinozism was not really important, but what it meant for Enlightenment philosophy and for philosophy in general was important, because Spinozism was equated with pantheism, and pantheism in turn was equated with fatalism and atheism, given Spinoza's denial of final causes, finitude of the universe, freedom of will, and a supernatural and personal God. Like at the beginning, it was only Jacobi and Mendelssohn arguing with each other, but in time, almost all the great leaders, thinkers of at the time, joined the conversation, joined the debate, like Kant, Hegel, Fichte, Schleiermacher, Goethe, all of them, because after a certain point it became like Jacobi and his supporters on one hand and Enlightenment philosophers on the other hand. Enlightenment philosophers were trying to, of course, to defend Enlightenment reliance on reason, that everything, every principle, every idea should be held accountable against reason, against the dictates of reason, and once this is done, reason can provide justification for them. Jacobi and his supporters were arguing the opposite, that is, reason, Enlightenment reason, does not provide justification for our most fundamental metaphysical questions. Let alone doing this, it actually undermines our, let's say, ethical systems, moral system, economic system, political system. So as I wrote, the Lessing was only a means for Jacobi to demonstrate that if we were consistent and pushed our reason to its limits, then we would have to embrace atheism, fatalism, and solipsism. We would have to deny the existence of God, freedom, other minds, the external world, and even the permanent existence of ourselves. In short, deny the existence of everything and become, to use Jacobi's dramatic language, nihilists. Jacobi, his understanding of nihilism and the pantheism controversy and how different modern German thinkers contributed to that controversy, of course, makes one part of Iqbal's understanding of the nihilism problem, but the other part comes from Nietzsche. Working on Nietzsche's writing, Bernhard Regenster make a nice distinction among Nietzsche's uses of nihilism in his scattered writings, let's say. And he says we can categorize Nietzsche's uses of nihilism in these two terms: nihilism as disorientation and nihilism as despair. And I think these two quotations from Nietzsche, I think, like gives or illustrates very nicely what Nietzsche means by them. The first one is just a quotation from the gay signs when the madman learns about the death of God and runs to the market to introduce this to the people there. Or this is his reaction, let's say. I mean, so he says, "Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it moving to now? Where are we moving to? Away from all suns? Are we not continually falling, and backwards, sidewards, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an up and down? Aren't we straying as though through an infinite nothing?" So basically the guy has lost his orientation with respect to everything around him. The so-called the nature, the universe, whatever that made that complete whole disappeared with the death of God. So now he cannot find his way, he feels disoriented. So this is one sense of Nietzsche's uses of nihilism, nihilism as disorientation, let's say. And then the other one is this version, you can also see it in Jacobi's uses as well. What is more distinctive to Nietzsche's usage is that nihilism as despair. That is, Nietzsche speaks from a point in the history of Western metaphysics, let's say, and looking back almost 200, 500 years of countless struggles to deal with this problem, and countless failures, actually, to deal with this problem. So Nietzsche considers the history of metaphysics, in the history of Western metaphysics, as a way of dealing with this problem and continually failing. So at the end of this 2,500 years of failures, Nietzsche, it would be understandable to feel despair, let's say. So that quotation, I think, illustrates this nicely. What does nihilism mean, Nietzsche asks? That the highest values devaluate themselves. Like, for instance, seeking truth is a highest value in the foundations of the Western metaphysics, let's say. But the more you seek the truth, what you find in the end is untruth. So the truth and the motivation to seek truth devalues itself in the end. And the aim is lacking. Why finds no answer. So you cannot find an answer to your why questions anymore. So you feel despair. And finally, I will just give this David's story, like after surveying a number of accounts of nihilism, he makes this nice general definition. Nihilism is a problem about humanity's relation to nature, about a crisis in human freedom and willing after the collapse of the cosmos, the erosion of a hierarchically ordered nature in which humans have a proper place. So that's, I think, self-explanatory, so I don't need to spend more time on this. I will continue with this so-called, what I call the established narrative on Iqbal and my attempt at a new interpretation. As I said, in the literature, you can find it almost in all books on Iqbal. It doesn't matter written by Pakistanis or Europeans, that they divide Iqbal's intellectual development into these three stages, and his time spent in Europe marks a crucial period. So they argue that before going to Europe, Iqbal was a supporter of Indian nationalism and he was a pantheist. And they base this on some of the poetry he wrote before going to Europe. And when he was in Europe, they argue that Iqbal went through a metaphysical, religious, political transformation. And after he returned to India, he became a supporter of Muslim nationalism and theism. In short, actually, like, it is an oversimplification, let's say, to say that Iqbal has had these ideas before and then changed later on the basis of those poetry, because, like, for instance, they refer to one of Iqbal's poem written before going to Europe, in which he praises the Himalayas, in which he writes about, there is a particular poem called Ode to India, for instance, where he talks about India as their homeland and refers to himself and other people as we are Indians, for instance. And then you can find, after he returned to India, a poem that is called Ode to Muslims, let's say. So, but Iqbal already also wrote similar poems, like, let's say, about his Islamic inclinations, about Muslim Brotherhood before going to Europe as well. And after he returned from Europe, he also continued writing about India in general. And this pantheism-theism issue is more complicated. I will not go into that, but maybe if in the questions we can go. It's actually based on, again, just simply not detailed analysis on Iqbal's own writings, but based on, let's say, the similarities between Iqbal's poetry and a pantheist thinker. Let's say, for instance, they Hafiz from Iran or Ibn Arabi, for instance, they argue that Iqbal was an admirer of Ibn Arabi, thus he was a pantheist, but without making a detailed critical analysis of Iqbal's own writings. Or he liked Hafiz, so he wrote some pantheistic, maybe, or like certain things that can be interpreted in pantheistic terms. So Iqbal was a supporter of pantheism. So my main argument is that, my main claim is that this fails to situate Iqbal's philosophy and his main problem in its particular historical and intellectual context. So then I try to make a new interpretation and, I don't know, categorization of the development of his philosophy. And I again follow these three stages, but in mine, I just established these stages on the basis of Iqbal's reaction to the problem of nihilism. So I argue that also our dates differ from each other. So I argue that from 1900 to 1908, Iqbal was aware of the problem of nihilism and he thought that he found a plausible solution to that problem. So he did not feel disoriented. So that's why I call the first period as the first overcoming. And then something interesting happens after he returned to India. And there I find the traces of his, let's say, falling into a nihilistic crisis and struggling with this problem. Of course, I don't argue that all these years, like 18 years, Iqbal has been in this state. But 4 years, definitely, in my interpretation, he has been in a crisis situation, but then the rest can be considered as his going out of the crisis. And after 1928, 1938, that's where what I call the second overcoming. That is, he just produced a systematic answer again to the problem. So, and this also coincides with his publication of the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. So the first overcoming my article was based on this part actually, which will be published next year, hopefully. This is based on two of Iqbal's writings. One is a very short article on 13th century Sufi thinker Abdul Karim al-Jili from Jil in current-day Iraq, as far as I know. He's a follower of Ibn Arabi, but a commentator on him. He disagrees with Ibn Arabi on certain points as well. So this article of Iqbal is an article on Abdul Karim al-Jili and his metaphysical system. And in that article, Iqbal struggles with the problem of nihilism, and he shows his awareness of the pantheism controversy and how different modern German philosophers contributed to that controversy. And also, Iqbal included that article into his doctoral dissertation 8 years later. So it forms one part of his doctoral dissertation as well. So Al-Jili's metaphysical system provides a plausible explanation to all these metaphysical questions. Let's say the origin of existence, where do we come from, where are we going, what is man, what is God, what is nature, how are these related to each other, is there freedom, free will, and things like that. So Iqbal thinks at that time, in my interpretation, that he has found a plausible solution. That's why I said that he does not feel disoriented. And he thinks that this solution that he has found in Abdul Karim Al-Jili's metaphysics is also almost the same as what Hegel found in 19th century. And Hegel's solution was kind of a solution to the problem of pantheism, to the problem of nihilism as well, at least within his own period. So what does this, what does Al-Jili say about these metaphysical questions? So this is, of course, again, Iqbal's interpretation of Al-Jili's metaphysics. So you may, or one may argue that Al-Jili did not say these things, but this is Iqbal's interpretation of Al-Jili's metaphysics. So in Al-Jili's metaphysics, there is this absolute, i.e. God, that wants to realize itself in existence. So Al-Jili distinguishes between God's essence and existence. So when God wants to realize itself in existence, he does this through man and nature. So existence refers to man and nature. And the aim of this existence is that to realize itself, of course, and then to return to itself in the end. So, I mean, this is my drawing, very simple, but yeah. The pure being leaves its pureness, its absoluteness, goes into existence to realize itself, and then the aim is to return itself in the end. So, let me see. For instance, the freedom of man, the free will of man issue. When Iqbal read these from Al-Jili, for instance, the way Al-Jili describes man's freedom, and also Hegel describes man's freedom, Hegel describes it as partly determined and partly free. Al-Jili describes it, man has, the absolute has uncaused will and freedom, and the man has caused will and freedom. That is, again, to say, man is partly free and partly determined. So there is at least a certain level of reality with respect to man's freedom, even though it's not uncaused. So that's acceptable for Iqbal at that time. Also, man's and nature's existence, the objective existence of man and nature, does not become problematic, at least in Al-Jili's metaphysics, because the aim of God or the absolute is to return to itself in the end. But man, for instance, Al-Jili does not approve the doctrine of Fena in its fullest terms. So he only considers it as a temporary process. That is, with the perfect man, with the Insan al-Kamil, Insan al-Kamil is a joining link between the existence, that is man and nature, and the absolute. So the absolute needs that transition to return to its own absoluteness again. But when that unification is maintained, man remains man and God remains God. So it's only a temporary unification, let's say. So man does not lose its objective existence or the nature as well. So that assures that man has a nature as well, has an objective existence, and also has a considerable amount of acceptable level of freedom. So this both provides this provides a plausible answer to Iqbal's metaphysical questions at that time. But after he returns from Europe, and the reason that I extend this period to 908 is that this you don't see any problem in Iqbal's thinking until he finishes his dissertation either. As I said, he also includes this into his doctoral dissertation. After he returns to India, something interesting, something strange maybe even, happens. When you look at Iqbal's writings, in no stage in his life you can see this, there is this particular pessimistic and cynical mood in his writing, in his poetry, in his letters with Atiye Begum, and his other articles. So this point also correlates to something else. That is the first time we see direct references to Nietzsche in his writings. So I thought that it would be reasonable to make this correlation. That is, after he started reading Nietzsche, first indirect references can be found in 1909, and then the first direct reference can be found in 1910. So there must be a correlation between his starting reading of Nietzsche and that his changing of mood. So in that mood, in that period, between these 4 years, we see in his writing two things. Like he starts to question God in a very daring mood. And he also seems to have a problem with the notion of freedom and will. This means, in another way, like the previous hierarchically ordered cosmos that he found in Al-Jili's metaphysics has collapsed. So these are some of the things that I have taken from his writings to illustrate this pessimist and cynical mood. For instance, he is writing to Atiye Begum. These are taken from his letters. The reason is that I have been very much upset during these days. My misfortune has been following me like a faithful dog. Like he has been exchanging art letters with Atiye Begum, and he always keeps talking about my misfortune, my misfortune.
Does he mean the time of his dissertation or review?
These are from 1909 to 1917. I mean, he kept after the dissertation. Yeah, after the dissertation. No, these are published by Atiye Begum later in a separate book. These are letters, private letters between Atiye Begum and him. But Atiye Begum did not publish her own letters. He just published Iqbal's responses. And she gives a context, like, okay, she says, for instance, we have been discussing about these and that, and Iqbal was always talking about his misfortune, blah, blah, blah. And then she says, for instance, I tried to console him. I mean, you love writing poetry, just go back to writing poetry because do something you like and it will cheer you up. So that's how Iqbal responds to in another letter. What will you do with these poems, he says, these wailings of a bleeding heart? There is nothing cheerfulness in them. So he keeps continuing with this mood. I mean, even though she tries to cheer him up. And then this is from another letter. My life is extremely miserable. They forced my wife upon me. I have written to my father that he had no right to arrange my marriage, especially when I had refused to enter into any alliance of that sort. I am quite willing to support her, but I'm not prepared to make my life miserable by keeping her with me. As a human being, I think these parts are important. As a human being, I have a right to happiness. If society or nature deny that to me, I defy both. The only cure is that I should leave this wretched country forever or take refuge in liquor, which makes suicide easier. Those dead, barren leaves of books cannot yield happiness. I have got sufficient fire in my soul to burn them up and and social conventions as well. A good God created all this, you say. Maybe. The facts of this life, however, tend to a different conclusion. It is intellectually easier to believe in an eternal, omnipotent devil rather than a good God. Please excuse me for these utterances. I do not want sympathy. I only wanted to disburden my soul. So you see, like, probably Atiye Begum was writing to him, like, okay, it will all be fine, God will solve these things, God is good, and blah, blah, blah. But he was resisting, okay, I mean, you can't say that a good God created all these things, all this suffering and pain, and there is a meaning in this. But it's intellectually easier to believe in an eternal, omnipotent devil than a good God. So you see also, I mean, again, this is an illustration of his attitude against God, his questioning of God, and also, like, there is a problem with respect to his freedom, like he doesn't want the society, the social conventions, norms, pressuring him. And then this is from another letter. Of course, everybody is waiting patiently for the place of rest. I am anxious to go to that place because I shall like to meet the Creator and call upon Him to give me a rational explanation of my mind, which I think is not an easy task for Him to do. I am incomprehensible to myself. You should not complain. So he wants to talk to God face to face and ask Him to give him a rational explanation of all these things that he cannot find an answer. And he thinks that this will not be easy for God to do so. And then this is this is just the beginning of a poem. Like, I didn't want to take the whole poem. This is called Shikwa. In English, it's called the complaint. So he's writing to God, and he's making his complaint face to face, let's say. So the whole poem goes through questionings, through questions directed against God, like, you promised us this, but you didn't give us those things. So you failed in one sense to live up to your promises. So this is the beginning of the poem, let's say. Why must I forever lose? This is of course English translation. Forever forego profit that is my due. Sunk in the gloom of evenings past, no plans for the morrow pursue. Why must I, all attentive, be to the nightingale's lament? Friend, am I as dumb as a flower? Must I remain silent? My theme makes me bold, makes my tongue more eloquent. Dust fills my mouth, against Allah I make complaint. So this marks, in my view,
If I'm not wrong, does it belong to Shikwa, Jawab Shikwa?
yeah. No, this one from Shikwa. Jawab Shikwa will come later. So in this one, in a sense, that he is doing what he wanted, what he said that he would do, to go to call God and to give him a rational explanation of things. And then this was written in 1911, and 2 years later, God responds to Iqbal. It's called Jawab Shikwa, like answer to the complaint, of course written by Iqbal, not by God. So God takes Iqbal's complaints seriously, and he thinks that he had a point, and then responds to him. I will again not go through the whole poem, but the whole poem is trying to explain, like, God is trying to explain why things have happened in the way that they have been. And the main argument of the poem is that, okay, I made a promise, but you also made a promise. If you follow up to your promise, I will support you. I will make you the glorious people again, kind of thing. So this is again the beginning of the poem. Your tale is indeed full of sorrow. Your tears tremble at the brim and are ready to flow. Your cry of lament the sky has wrung. What cunning your impassioned heart has lent to your tongue. So eloquently did you word your plaint, you made it sound like a praise. To talk on equal terms with us, man to celestial heights did rise. So after 1913, I think this is the beginning of Iqbal's coming to a reconciliation with God as well. Like, he keeps this questioning mood and daring attitude towards him, but then after this poem, and after 4 years of maybe struggling with this crisis, he comes to a point where he feels again ready to think about those metaphysical questions and to reinterpret them with a new light to create, and again, a hierarchically ordered nature where man has a proper place, where his freedom and will is maintained for real, and his objective existence as well. So Iqbal has a number of writings from 1913 to 1920s, but I will not discuss them in details here, in which you can see step-by-step construction of this new metaphysical framework. But I will just come to the conclusion, that is the conclusion of his second overcoming. That is how he provides a new metaphysical picture in which he was able to make sense of things, let's say, and rescue him from this nihilistic crisis. So you can think that the main structure is still the same, but how the things in the system functions, that makes a difference. Of course, there is still a God. This time, Iqbal uses the term ego, and he defines the ego as a rationally directed creative will. So it's a rational thing, and it's rationally directed, so it's creative and it's will. And every atom of divine energy, however low in the scale of existence, is an ego. So everything is an ego, like a piece of stone, even an atom is an ego, a man is an ego, God is an ego as well. So to refer to God, he uses the term the ultimate ego, and the rest are egos. So there are degrees in the expression of egohood. Egos differ with respect to their levels of individualities. The ultimate ego, God, has the highest level of individuality. It's less perfect in man, it's less perfect in animals, it's less perfect in stones and stuff like that. But all are egos. In that sense, they all share the same essence, but how they use those attributes, that is, they are all rational, they are all creative, and they all have wills, differs with respect to their level of individuality.
What's the original term for ego?
Iqbal writes in English, so ego. This is from his poetry, let's say. I mean, in poetry he writes in Persian, then he uses the term hudi. Yes, you can say that, but Iqbal writes in English, so then he uses the term ego. So, what makes the previous metaphysical picture problematic is that, first of all, it's only the absolute that realizes itself in existence. So the whole existence is kind of a playground for the absolute to realize itself in existence. Man and nature does not really have a role in that existence. The second thing that becomes problematic for Iqbal is that the freedom that is assigned to man and nature is not uncaused, it's not really real. You can see that, for instance, I mean, when writing the article on Abdul Kerim El-Jili, Iqbal makes similarities with Hegel's ideas very often as well. So, for instance, the same thing you can see there too. In Hegel, for instance, the main motor of social change, social and political change, is what is called the world historical individuals. These guys, like, let's say, Christ, Caesar, Napoleon. These are the figures, actors that act on the basis of their own passions, goals, desires, but that's what they think. Actually, the reason wants to achieve certain ends, and to to achieve those ends, reason kind of manipulates these world historical individuals to achieve its own ends. So it's Napoleon that gathers all these armies, conquers countries, builds new states, builds new peoples, but it's actually the Geist, the spirit, or whatever Hegel calls it in many ways, that tries to achieve its own ends. So what those individuals do are not really, do not really have a value for themselves, let's say. That's why, for instance, Hegel calls history as the cunning of reason. So another problem is that in both Elgili's metaphysics and in Hegel's metaphysics, it's a closed-ended process. It's already predetermined, so we already know, or it's already known where the process is leading to. For instance, the Geist is leading to the Prussian state in the form of a state, for instance, in the social and political level. Or it's leading to Protestantism, let's say, as a particular form of Christianity, as a consummate religion. And it's leading to Hegel's philosophy in the form of philosophy. So all these things up to, for instance, 19th century when Hegel wrote, were just things to reach to that level. So everything was already predetermined. So there was not real freedom or will or meaning in whatever each individual did mattered. They all were destined to go to that direction. So the end was closed-ended, predetermined. That was also problematic. So Iqbal had to think of a new way that would do away with these problems. So it has to be open-ended. The self-realization process has to be open-ended. And the freedom and will of man has to be real. And of course, the existence of other egos must have an objective reality. They cannot just be there and, I don't know, like their existence should be able to continue. So then he defines, as I said, the whole existence as ego, and then all egos have these attributes, although differing in degrees. So it's not only God anymore that tries to realize itself in existence. It's also man that tries to realize itself in existence. It's also nature. It's also animals, other egos as well. And none of them has absolute control or domination, let's say, in the process. Of course, God has a more perfect level of individuality and he has more control, but he is not the sole dominator of the whole process. So man contributes to that process as well. Animals or other egos contribute to that process as well, with respect to their own power, with respect to their own freedom, with respect to their own knowledge, etc. So in that sense, the end is open-ended. Even God itself doesn't know where this will lead to. So that also makes the process free, because every action you take has the potential to change of the course of the self-realization process. What else should I add? Maybe I can stop here because I already spoke 46 minutes. And then if you want, we can continue with the question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, questions and comments after this highly sophisticated philosophical talk. What is the God's purpose?
First of all, we study Iqbal from our childhood, not the his reconstruction of the poetry. Everybody has done his hundreds of comparisons. And I never came across any pantheistic idea